going to pause a minute to give our tech people to move the camera since my mic wasn't working there. They have to move it back. Over the last 6 weeks while I was away, one of the devotionals that I read was an excerpt from a book called Growing Strong in the Broken Places, a title that may itself make you wonder about it. But in the excerpt that was my devotional for the day, it featured a potter who was reflecting on her craft. And she said, while looking at the pots, she noticed how they are formed always inherently under tension. What she meant is that the clay takes shape between the tension between her hands that sculpt it, one on the outside, one from within, giving shape to the final creation. She went on to muse that perhaps our lives are the same way, constantly shaped by the forces working upon us, those outside of us, events that happened beyond our control, events that happen to us, and those forces within us of who we are, of love and care and compassion which tend to us, of tenacity, of faith, of God's grace upon grace bestowed. She said she wonders if life is formed and forged in between that inherent tension, the pressure between the two. And yet, she went on, so many of us prefer to live a life that is as tension-free as possible. At least given a choice, she makes the argument that we would not choose those places of pressure and tension. We might rather prefer to go a long way to avoid them, actually. Avoiding uncomfortable but necessary conversations, quitting when things get too tough, turning away to injustices that nag at us but that feel too big for us to know what to do about. And yet she says that it is there in those spaces that perhaps the dreams for who God is calling us to be might come to fruition, that our lives are shaped, who we are, who God is yet shaping us into in those places. That's where creativity is activated. Those places we sometimes might choose to avoid if given the chance. Now, to be fair, we avoid them for very good reason because, they don't feel necessarily, though we might say, oh, it's an opportunity. It doesn't usually feel like that. It feels exactly like what the potter describes: pressure, tension, pain, discomfort, grief, struggle, loss, reckoning. These are dark night of the soul kinds of moments. Places where you are sure that if you get to the other side with a blessing, it will absolutely be accompanied by a limp. At least that's how it is for Jacob. For 20 years, Jacob has avoided this very space. He has avoided facing his brother again. You'll remember the last time we met Jacob and Esau together. Jacob had stolen his brother's identity, deceived his father, taken the blessing for his own. Esau was naturally pretty upset about this, and so Jacob went on the run for 20 years. Even though God promised to bring Jacob home to his home, which maybe at the time he got that promise didn't feel like such a promise because he got the promise while he was running away from home. But finally, 20 years later, he comes back, listening where God has called him. He's in that tense space that the potter talks about, and he is terrified. And in this case, he is getting ready to face it alone. Now, Jacob, of course, is known as a schemer as well. He's a clever guy. And so he's preparing to do everything he can to face this moment and to withstand it. And so he's got a plan. First, he's going to butter up his brother and try and soften the squeeze a bit. So he sends him gifts after gifts after gifts, spreading them out for dramatic effect. But then, in case that doesn't work, he's got a backup plan. He's figured out that he'll just split up his family into two groups, And he'll send one this way and one that way and make Esau choose which way to go. At least one group will survive that way. And then, with nothing left, he also has and arms himself for this moment with prayer, a prayer which is at times bargaining, at times faithful, at times humble, at times entitled, at times so trusting in God, and also so much relying on himself. Finally, after he's done all those things to face this moment, he crosses the river and he lays down by himself, terrified and alone for a fitful night's sleep, for a moment 20 long years in the making. And it's there, with Jacob, terrified, unable to sleep, preparing for the worst under the cover of night, that the confrontation is suddenly upon him now. It will not wait for daylight. This time it is not some heavenly dream of a ladder which wakes him up. Instead, it is some unidentified man coming to wrestle with him. Jacob's ready not to run, but this time to stay, hold his ground, and engage in it. He refuses, for his part, to let go. He doesn't even know who he's facing, at least at the onset, but he knows that he is ready now to face it. And so all night the two of them wrestle. In a stalemate, neither of them able to get the upper hand. Even after Jacob is injured, he won't let go. He holds on. Sometime in the night, he's realized it is worth holding on to. And so finally, as the first dawning light begins to come, the man cries out, "Let me go! It's almost daylight." Jacob has the presence of mind, or simply the audacity, to demand a blessing before letting go, which is so intriguing because let me go, it's almost daylight. It's a warning to Jacob. It's not the man who's threatened by daylight, it's Jacob. For everyone knows at this time that if light comes, if you see God face to face in the clear of day, it's certain death. But what does Jacob have to lose? He was facing certain death from his brother in the morning anyways. What does it matter if he goes at the hand of God or the hand of his brother? And so he demands in that moment a blessing. I can't tell if this is human desperation or if this is tremendous faith in God's promises that God will make them good. Maybe there's always some mix of the two in those desperate dark night of the soul moments. But Jacob demands a blessing. He holds on, determined that the struggle will give him some kind of strength, determined that there will be goodness, life, out of what seems a sure death. What Reverend Jeremy Smith refers to as a no-win situation, Jacob holds on to it and dares to believe it can be something else. And my friends, what makes this story, for all the ways it may challenge us, for all the ways it may raise questions in us like it did in the children and does in the children, what makes this story good news amidst all of it is that God delivers. God honors this bold, desperate faith with grace beyond measure. God will not give up on Jacob any more than Jacob will let go of God. And so God blesses him right then and there in the midst of the struggle. Right then and there, God reiterates the earlier promises and gives Jacob a new name to mark them, no longer Jacob, but Israel, one who strives with God and man and overcomes. Generations upon generations of God's ancient people will be heirs of that same name, Israel, born out of the struggle, gifted out of a schemer's tenacity and presence of mind to believe blessing can come from those places. all the way to today. We ourselves, Christians, grafted in by God's grace into the same story of wrestling, into the same ancestry, by grace, heirs of the same good promises. We too are those who yet strive with God and whom God refuses to let go of. Just as God refused to let go of Jacob. Jacob, it seems, is like that clay formed in the tension, and he becomes Israel, the strong vessel for God's covenant and God's people. The epitome of strength in the broken, limping places where we dare to yet hang on. I've already said that this story raises lots of questions in me. It doesn't always make the most sense to me. It definitely challenges an understanding of faith. I was raised with an understanding of faith that is always humble and obedient. Jacob doesn't fit into that. But for all of that, my friends, what challenges me and what inspires me in this story is that it invites me to consider those places that God is calling that I have avoided going. Places that feel uneasy or uncertain, places of tension and discomfort. Those uncharted territories of our own humanity and our mortality, of our communities, our relationships. This story has a way of beckoning, at least me and hopefully others too, into and not away from those places. It beckons me with the good news that God awaits us even there. In the deepest and darkest and most fearful and sleepless of nights, God is there to hold on to us. Maybe we think of it as wrestling, but maybe God is just holding on so that we can't let go until we can hold on back. There's something good about that, my friends. The God who grabs hold of Jacob in his vulnerable state is the same God who grabs hold of us too. If only we will venture close enough and hold on back. So it is, my friends, that we are invited into the struggle. Sometimes life drags us there. Let's be honest about that too. But in those places, grounded in God's presence there, equipped with a faith like Jacob's, which is scrappy and tenacious and bold. Faith that is a little bit like Oobleck, a little bit messy, a little unclear exactly what it is, at times solid, determined, at other times melding into your hands, into God's hands, yet being formed. Somehow out of the stalemate, out of the mess, out of the darkness of night, God brings forth blessing and promise in ways we couldn't imagine. It may well leave us limping on the other side, but my friends, I believe that is so much better than letting go into the darkness. So may it be for us this day and always. Amen.